Today's quick lesson is on ancient religion, how ancient people understood the universe. Historians and anthropologists believe that ideas about the supernatural most likely arose as a way for humans to explain the natural world. Without science, you have to explain why there's lightning, why there's thunder, why there's rain, and animism may have provided those answers. So the earliest human ideas of the supernatural were probably animist, meaning that humans believed in a spirit or a soul, and either the immortality of that soul or maybe its connection to a larger, more universal soul. Animists ascribe souls to human beings, but also to other animate and inanimate objects, so animals, plants, stones, rivers, etc. So people living in the Stone Age may have believed that the river had spirits and the trees had spirits, and so their interactions with the natural world were interactions with these different spirits. Animists then, and in fact modern animists, continue to worship these spirits or souls, or they worship the inanimate, immaterial, universal soul at specific locations that are believed to be special to the universal soul. The best known of the modern day animists are probably Native Americans, at least certainly in our country, but the Vodun or voodoo is also a pretty well known religion where you have a mix of traditional African animist beliefs with later European Catholicism mixed in. By the time we get to the first human civilizations, most ancient religions have developed into polytheism, right? The belief in many gods. Without ways to understand the world objectively, ancient people explain natural events now as the actions of these deities, these supernatural beings whose actions directly affected what was going on the earth. It was probably a really easy step to go from a belief in animism to one in a concrete person, right, a deity, because these human cultures gave deities anthropomorphic tendencies. In other words, while deities could look like animals or humans, their actions and motives resembled those of human beings. So it was relatively easy for humans to understand what the gods were doing and why the gods were doing it. They were angry, they were sad, they fell in love, just like human beings did. As you've read in your textbook, all of the earliest civilizations had polytheistic religious beliefs. These civilizations all had very elaborate pantheons with gods and goddesses that over time had been adapted and adopted due to intellectual sharing. As these early civilizations traded and learned from one another, they also shared religious beliefs, which led to religious adaptation, especially among the peoples in the Mediterranean region and across the Middle East. When we talk about this religious adaptation and sharing, we're really talking about two phenomena. One of them is called syncretism. And syncretism is the merging or combining of beliefs and values between cultures where you get the creation of a new belief or a new value. On the other hand, diffusion is the transmission of a belief or a value that's mostly unchanged as it's transmitted across space and across cultures. What ended up happening across the Mediterranean region, and in fact across the Middle East as well, was for the most part syncretism. For example, you have the god Melkart, or Baal, who was the Phoenician god of the city of Tyre. Well, Baal becomes associated with or connected to Zeus, right, who is the god of the Greeks. In both cases, Baal or Zeus is known as an all-powerful or a father god. In fact, this statue of Baal that you see here was probably at one point holding a thunderbolt, just like Zeus often holds one. Similarly, the goddess Astarte, who was known in Phoenicia, also in Egypt. In Egypt, she's the daughter of Ra, and she was also known in Turkey. Well, she is Aphrodite of the Greeks and of the Roman tradition. In all of those cases, she is associated with both fertility and beauty. As another example, this is a sculpture of the mother goddess of Anatolia from the age of Catalhoyuk, so very, very early on in settled human history. Well, this particular woman, who is also a symbol of fertility, and you can see that a bit because of the throne on which she's seated, which has these really cool little like lamb or calf heads, an indication of fertility. she becomes associated with the much later version of the great mother goddess, the Roman Cybele, right? The great mother. Note that Cybele is also seated on a kind of a throne-like thing, and she was often shown with an animal at her side as well, and she's got this basket of bounty on top of her head. So the attributes of the mother goddess and Cybele didn't really change, and in fact the way they're portrayed didn't even really change over time, but it did move across territory. Let's look at a couple more examples, this time from the Middle East proper. Here is Astarte again. She's the Phoenician goddess of fertility and beauty, also was known in Egypt. Well, she is associated with Inanna of the Sumerian era, or Ishtar of the Babylonian era. Again, these were goddesses of fertility, and look at how similarly they are portrayed, even though we're looking at 1,000 years or so between these two depictions, right? You've got a genuinely nude figure. You have an image that's looking straight out at the observer. And she's even standing in very similar ways. As another example, we have the god Enka, or Ea, who is the Sumerian god of underground water, but who's also associated with the rising sun. And you can see that here, these little waves indicate the water. And although you can't really see it in this image because it's blurry, but there's a sort of rising sun just over his head. Well, Enka is associated with the Vedic god Agni, so from South Asia. Agni is the god of fire, as you can probably obviously tell from this image. But in mythology, Agni rises from water and is connected to knowledge. So again, we have this syncretism that emerges between the Middle East and South Asia. So what's the purpose of presenting this information to you today? Well, the activity today calls for you to travel across different stations and analyze art, much of it religious art, to get a better sense of how the art reflects not just social structures, but the culture of the various ancient societies. In order to analyze the art a bit more effectively, you need to know or figure out whatever it is you're looking at. Look for the title of the piece or its date, maybe an artist, or where it's from, what's its region or ethnicity. If the attribution, if all of that information in Part A just isn't available, then ask yourself, what does it look like and what might it have been used for? Remember, you're best guessing. It doesn't have to be a correct answer. Next, study the piece. Look at the designs or inscriptions that might be on it. Can you decipher them, or are they recognizable forms? Like, are they water? Is it the sun? Is it fire? What are the forms doing? Or is it language? And if it is language, what might it be saying? Finally, try to determine why the piece was made. Look at the overall impression of it. Is it powerful? Is it scary? Does it tell a story? And if so, what story does it tell? What might the artist have been trying to say, trying to convey to the audience, who at that time was the people in his or her own culture, but now is you? So how does this piece speak to you? As you go through the various stations today, keep in mind that you're probably not going to be 100% correct all the time, and that's okay. You're analyzing art, and that's tricky. But try your best to figure out what these pieces said about the cultures that created them, and think about what that also says about the various institutions of that culture, like their social structures.